Shabbat Shalom, great men of Yahweh. It's truly an honor to come before the great men in Yahweh's house, the great called out brothers that Yahweh has called in these last days to His great house, and to be able to go over these righteous teachings that we're receiving here in these last days. We are going to be continuing on here in the 13th book of Yisrayl. The 13th book of Yisrayl, gold, purifying gold. And this is the series of sermons Pastor gave in 2013. And we're going to be on chapter 6. This is on page 56 if you have your book of Yisrayl. And this is part 1, the 13th book of Yisrayl, part 1. And if you don't have your book of Yisrayl, if you just want to take notes, and if you have your scriptures handy, we'll go through a couple of scriptures here this evening. But we're on page 56, which is chapter 6. This was the sermon Pastor gave February 16th, 2013. Going for the gold, number 1, the next pope, in whose likeness will he be? And this was, I believe this was right around the time where the last pope had announced that he was retiring. And these are the series of sermons Pastor gave here showing in whose likeness this Pope Francis would be. And we do know with the great sermons we've been receiving here in these last days, Pope Francis is the son of perdition. Okay, and he is the last pope here in these last days that is fighting against the saints of Yahweh. You righteous men here, and also all our brothers and sisters who are striving for perfect righteousness and a perfect position in Yahweh's kingdom. Those who are spread throughout the world, and some who are being held back at this time. And Pastor says here in verse 1, chapter 6, on page 56, Shalom everyone, you sound very cheerful. All praise Yahweh. Come on, joyful cheering and praise to Yahweh. You may be seated. Praise Yahweh, you may be seated. We're glad to be here. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. It's certainly not with the world at this time. And I was just looking here, I don't know about you men, but I know on the close of the 6th day of the week is like the most exciting time of the week as we're about to go into the great Sabbath. And Pastor says here, we're glad to be here. Now, I looked up this word glad here briefly before class, and some of the meanings of this word glad are pleased, delighted, causing joyfulness, grateful, willing and eager to do something. And it comes, the origin is Old English, glad, originally in the sense of bright or shining. And this recalled to mind, if you write in your notes, Numbers chapter 6, in verse 25. This is a part of Yahweh's priestly blessing. Numbers chapter 6 and verse 25, or 24 through 26 is the whole priestly blessing. But in verse 25 it says, Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be merciful to you. You know, and the great Sabbath day is our time to be glad that Yahweh's brought us here to His house for another awesome learning experience so that we would be able to grow in the knowledge of Yahweh. And the Sabbath day truly is a great rest from the week of madness, you know, and another day where Yahweh's brought us out of this hellhole, this world, as we know it right now, which is in such disarray and confusion, that we actually can come on the great Sabbath day to rejoice before Yahweh. And we should be very glad to be here on the Sabbath day. You know, we should rejoice and keep the Sabbath day properly. Keep the Sabbath day properly as we've been instructed to do in these last days, with rejoicing before Yahweh, you know, with partaking of both the physical, the greatest physical food on the face of the earth, and also with the only spiritual food being offered on the face of the earth. You know, because this is the only house that's bringing forth spiritual food throughout all the universe at this time. You know, throughout the earth at this time is right here from Yahweh's great house, from Yahweh's chosen servant, Yisrael Hawkins. We're going to pick up here on page 57 and verse 7. You know, and of course, like always, we have like a lot of pages to go through in a very short amount of time. I do encourage you, men, to go through chapter 6 here of the 13th book of Yisrayl, part 1, on the great Sabbath day here, for we have the next 24 hours in front of us. You know, because in case you haven't noticed it yet, just as it says in Isaiah, that it would be precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little and there a little. And it says so that they, speaking of the wicked that's spoken of in Daniel chapter 12, that they may stumble and fall backward. Okay, because pastor's teachings, Yahweh's inspired pastor to teach us in these last days, here a little and there a little. And if you notice how the sermons we go over in law class and the sermons we go over in the workshops and the lessons we go through in the workshops on the Sabbath day, how all these things go hand in hand with what's being poured out in these last days, and how it's like a puzzle and all these pieces start fitting together. But pastor says here on verse 7 on page 57, he says it would be great if all the priests and those who desire to be priests could get these gold suits. It'd really be great if you could. All the men praise Yahweh. And of course, we know for this feast, in case you have forgotten, for this feast we need to get our orders in for our purple talits so that we'd be able to be in unity with Yahweh and that we'd be able to show Yahweh that we desire to be priests in His kingdom forever. Because each and every one of you, men, each and every one of us, we've been called here in these last days, we've been called here to become priests in Yahweh's everlasting kingdom. Okay? And Yahweh sent us the greatest teacher in the world. He's raised him up from his mother's womb, brought him from the ends of the earth to teach and guide and lead us so that we would become priests in Yahweh's great kingdom. And we have to keep that in the forefront of our minds. Even the priests do this because, the position we hold right now is an ordained position we've been given these last days. But remember, if we don't prove ourselves, then we won't hold this position in Yahweh's kingdom. And so we have to always be mindful that we're striving to be priests in Yahweh's kingdom forever. We have the greatest example, just as pastor has the greatest example in the scriptures with our high priest Yeshua Messiah. We have the greatest example living and breathing right in front of us, teaching us almost every week. And if we take advantage of the righteous teachings, we can be taught every moment of the day, and even when we're sleeping. And we're being taught and trained to be these priests in Yahweh's kingdom. And just quickly, if you go over or write in your notes, Proverbs chapter 5, Proverbs chapter 4 and 5 on page 498 in your book of Yahweh and 499. Because one of the greatest things, men, and we went over at last feast, we went over in Proverbs chapter 6 here. I'll briefly just cover verses 16 and 17, Proverbs 6, 16 and 17. There are 6 things Yahweh hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to Him. And look at the first one there in Proverbs 6, 17, a proud look. A proud look. In carnality, and Satan has done an excellent job, through her teachers over the last 1,500, 1,600 years of doing away with the scriptures, doing away with righteous teachings, has done a stand-up job at breeding carnality. And pride. And these things are embedded deep within our minds, man. These things, we didn't have to be taught these things. We didn't go to a proud school, and we didn't have mama proud and papa proud. These things were ingrained within us, to the 3rd and 4th generation before we were born, and the 3rd and 4th generation before they were born. These things have been deeply rooted throughout time here. If you go back to the beginning in Genesis chapter 4, where Yahweh says in Genesis 4 verse 7, if you do righteousness, will you not be accepted? He's speaking to Cain here. And if you do not do righteousness, sin is crouching at your door. The desire to sin is with you, but you must overcome it. And this is that proud look. The desire to sin is that proud look. And we don't try to be, we haven't been higher educated in proud looks, but these things are deeply rooted within us, and I don't want to be making accusations up here, so I can say they're deeply rooted within me, and I believe if we all closely examine ourselves, we'll see how strong pride is in our thinking and our patterns and the minds. How the mind works and how it's fueled by pride. And usually the first thought that comes to mind usually is a proud look. It's this carnality that's snapping right to the front and wanting to jump out. But in Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 1, it says, "Hear, O children, the instruction of Yahweh." I know we're we're getting old here, and most of y'all been looking at me since I was a child, and I'm looking in the mirror and thinking like Pastor, like, man, thought I had brown hair. We're aging, okay, and we're growing, but we are children of Yahweh, okay, and we're children of Yisrayl, because if you're in Yahweh's house in these last days, you're a child of Yisrayl Hawkins. Whether you're a bastard child or whether you're an obedient child, that's your choosing. But Yahweh's called you here to be a child of Yisrayl Hawkins. That's the only reason we're here, man. We're here to be trained by our righteous father and leader, Yisrael Abel Hawkins. But hear, O children, the instruction of Yahweh. Pay attention so you may grow in understanding. For I give you sound doctrine, so do not forsake my law. When I was my father's son, tender and beloved in the sight of my mother, he also taught me and said to me, let your mind retain, grasp, and hold on to all my words, keep my laws and instructions, and live. And then if you go over to Proverbs chapter 5, it says, my son, listen to wisdom, lend your ear to my understanding, so you may exercise discretion, your lips may guard knowledge. And it says here in verse 7, Proverbs chapter 5, verse 7, so listen to me now, my children, and do not turn aside from what I say. Keep your way far from her. And this is speaking of the adulteress, but you can think, what is Satan? She's nothing but an adulteress, a rebellious wife who turned against her head. And this is where this proud look and this carnal thinking and this desire to sin is deeply ingrained within us, comes from inspiration of Satan. And of course, Yahweh allowed her to be able to do such a great job in making it so strong in these last days, where it said sin would reach its peak, where we can recognize how quick our minds can run in the wrong way, but Yahweh allowed that. If you remember, Yahweh allowed Satan to do these things so that we could prove that we would be what Yahweh created us to be, obedient children. Okay, who would hear the teachings from their father, who would hear the instructions, and who would reject this desire to sin, this desire to follow this rebellious woman. And it says, so listen to me, my children, in verse 7, do not turn aside from what I say. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house, or you will give honor to others, and your years to those without mercy. And if you go down to verse 11, it says, you will mourn in the end times as your flesh and your body waste away. And, sadly, we live in this earth, which is a toxic mess because of the sins of man, and in these end times, our bodies are, feeling the effects of sin, even if we've been so blessed to stay free from certain things, we're still feeling the effects of sin, because sin has the ripple effect, as the Peaceful Solution says, and what mankind is doing is getting in the firmament, and we all need the firmament to survive. There's none of us that can do without a healthy firmament. But then you will say, and we shouldn't really be mourning, it should, for the great saints of Yahweh, this should be a rejoicing time to be able to witness exactly what Yahweh prophesied thousands of years ago that would take place, and we're living in these days. And you will say how I hated instruction, how my mind resented rebuke and warning. I would not obey my teachers, nor listen to those who instructed me. Now I am on the verge of total ruin in the midst of the congregation and the assembly. I just want you to be mindful there, that Yahweh's called us, man. He's called us here to be priests in Yahweh's kingdom. And Pastor, every instruction he gives us, every teaching lesson he pours out to us, all this golden oil down to the smallest drop, is so that we would be able to take those positions in Yahweh's kingdom. We have to put away this proud look, this proud look and this desire to go off on our own understanding and to turn away from righteousness. And Pastor says here in verse 8, he says, what we want to do is show Yahweh that we truly want to be part of this kingdom. And if this whole bunch could be priestess and priests, which there's no reason why you can't, It's based on your efforts. Of course, but if we could get to be priest and priestess or kings, we could serve better in that than any other position that I know of. So you can see Yahweh, yes, he called us, as the scripture says that he would take fools to confound the wise. We were fools, ignorant, bastard children, and he called us to his house to be brought up and trained that we would be able to serve the best. He called us here to be priests in his kingdom. And the ones that served the best, that's where they were. They were able to get the jobs done with that authority in the Holy Scriptures. So let's strive for it. Make an effort to do so before the feast. Get busy, hurry. And I think back to years ago where Pastor said, no, you don't have a bunch of time. Get it done today. That we should be striving for this every moment that we have, because we know not what will come tomorrow, or the next day. We know not what lies in our futures, but we know that Yahweh's called us here to prove to be priests in his kingdom. And really, it's simple, although we know it's complicating, but it's very simple in the fact that we just have to obey the teachings. We have to humble ourselves to follow the great teacher, and Pastor lays it all out. And although when he lays it out, sometimes we're like, what does that have to do with, gold suit, purple tallit? What does that have to do with? Remember Pastor said, I don't have the time to bring you all these things at this time. There's thousands of sermons that can go with these things, but, first comes obedience, then comes understanding. You obey the instructions. You obey what you're told to do. And so I pray, men, that we're all striving here, as Pastor says, that we're striving to show Yahweh that we truly want to be part of his kingdom. Because if we're not truly striving and making this effort to show Yahweh we want to be part of his kingdom, then we're showing Yahweh that we want to be part of Satan's kingdom. And the world is so damned confused, and last week, I know it was very solemn and heartening in the fact of seeing how evil sin is, but it starts right there in Proverbs 6:17, a proud look. This system that's gotten to such vile atrocities comes from disobedience, rebellion, disobeying. So if we're showing Yahweh that we truly want to be a part of his kingdom, then we're going to be following the instructions Yahweh's given us in these last days. If you go on to page 58, starting in verse 16 and then skipping to 17 and 18 quickly, it says, but anyway, you have these groups inside the Vatican. And then in verse 17 it says, it's not that they want to change their evil. Nothing ever occurred to them. And you can see this with Pope Francis, although he puts on a pretty great, Santa Claus look, good for the children, and sweet kisses and letting doves go and all these neat-looking things, picking up bums off the street and washing their feet and taking them for a ride in his Pope mobile. It's not that he's wanting to change the evil of the system. No, Pastor says, nothing ever occurred to them. He says, well, if we repent of this, we wouldn't have to hide it, But they want to hang on to this darkness, as Yeshua said. They love darkness more than light because their deeds are evil. Well, he was speaking of the Pharisees, who, of course, were also hypocrites. And Yeshua told them they were hypocrites. Like this man in the last segment there that was played today, referring to the news, he said he believed, or he was led to believe, that all this was good. But he couldn't find anything good about the whole thing. Well, that's, of course, because he doesn't know what good is. Pastor, in one of the recent prophetic word programs, it's like 775 or 774, one of those, he said, they always say for Christmas that if you're good, then Santa's going to bring you presents. And he said, but what they don't tell you is that good isn't righteousness. Good is God. And Genesis 3 verse 5, evil like the gods. And this is what's being taught in the world. Be good. Santa will bring you presents. What's coming from the Catholic Church is good. Well, it is. It's evil like the gods. Genesis 3 verse 5. It's evil. The world loves darkness more than light because their deeds are evil. Their every thinking and thought pattern is on their own selves and fulfilling their own lusts. And this is why we see such great confusion in the world today, where nobody can agree. Even the Pope and his, Catholic spokesman or whatever they have, they don't even agree. The Pope says one thing and then they release a statement saying, well, that's not really what he said. What he meant was, it's like there's not even no agreement between them, and there's no agreement between those who are fighting, these supposed wars. They trying to kill their enemies, but then just as soon as their enemies are out of sight, they're ready to kill each other. And this is the confusion we see in the world, because the world loves darkness more than light, because their deeds are evil. And the system is promoting this evil way. Genesis 3, verse 5. Be good. Santa's going to bring you presents. Well, Santa can stay the hell away from here, because we don't want no presents, and we don't want no good. As one of the great priests said, none of us are good, and we ain't happy. We're joyful, and we're striving for righteousness. Okay? Because this evil like the gods is totally in opposition against what Yahweh is bringing. And Pastor goes on here in verse 21 on page 59. And he says the kingdoms here, the kingdoms that are given to us in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 here with the 10 religions. Now, if you can imagine trying to control the Baptist, the Methodist, the Church of Christ, and all these others, and you are in leadership and you have these religions with each one teaching a different thing. The one thing they don't teach and won't allow, the one thing they all agree to outlaw is righteousness. So you can see it's not about having the Baptists and the Methodists and the Church of Christ and, the church over here and the church over there. It's not about having them all say the same thing. It's just about having them all teach and outlaw righteousness. And if you see that amongst the religions today, they have a religion for every different type of person, and every different type of animal or whatever it is, and these things, they all have their disagreements and their different sects and factions, but the only thing you see that they all have in common is they outlaw righteousness. They teach against righteousness. They condemn righteousness. Okay, they come against Yahweh's laws, and this is the one thing the religions don't teach. They won't teach, and they won't allow. The one thing they all agree to outlaw is righteousness. Okay, because they're striving to be good. Genesis 3, verse 5. They want to be good. They want to be good, which comes from God, and they want to be evil like the gods. Okay, and this is what you're going to see. This is what you're going to see that's going to just totally tear them apart, as the scriptures, the prophet Daniel wrote about how them crumbling at their feet and this beast falling. This is what you're seeing here, because they're outlawing righteousness, and you can't live without Yahweh's laws of righteousness. It's impossible. It's an impossible feat. You can't live without Yahweh's laws of righteousness. Just as gravity is sure, if you jump off a building, you're going to splat. You can try a parachute or some kind of fancy suit or some rocket booster, but eventually it's going to catch up to you, and gravity's going to catch up to you, and you're going to splatter. Okay, and this is what we see in the world today, that the religions, their teaching and outlawing righteousness is catching up to them quickly, and even beyond what they can understand with what we see in the firmament. And just quickly here, men, if you write down in your notes on page 262, because Pastor says here on page 59, he says in verse 22, Yahweh says you're dying. The people, every time they eat a bite of pork, they're dying. And then on page 262 in this book of Yisrayl here, this 13th part 1, verse 11, Pastor says if your mind is a little bit sick, which it is already from the food and the activities you've been practicing all your life before you came here, and even all our good that we thought we were in the world is evil like the gods. Genesis 3, verse 5. We were trained to be gods. We were taught to be gods. We were brought up to be gods, growing up in this world in Christianity. But Pastor says, if something enters your mind in verse 12, if something enters your mind, you don't want to harbor it. And he's talking about evil thoughts. These evil deeds of these religions, these evil thoughts, these good thoughts, these God thoughts. Genesis 3, verse 5, evil like the gods. When these things come into our minds, you don't want to harbor it. You want to say, get behind me, Satan. Don't go around repeating it and showing what an idiot you are, for your disbelief. Build the house. Build the protected place. Praise Yahweh, Pastor says. And this is our job, man. We are builders. A priest of Yahweh is a builder of Yahweh's house. And priest in training, Yahweh has called you here to build his house. And you don't need nails and you don't need hammer, although you might sometimes. But you do need to guard your mouth, what comes forth from your mouth, and make sure you're building Yahweh's house. Okay, building Yahweh's house with every thought and saying that comes from you. Because believe it or not, whether you think you're a teacher or not, you are teaching. I think of the shirts that the children wear. It says, you're teaching me by your words and actions. You're teaching me by your words and actions. And Yahweh is seeing, what are we teaching? And Yahweh willing, man, we're not teaching anything good. Okay? Evil like the gods. We don't want to be teaching evil like the gods. But here back on page 60, to conclude the lesson here, on page 60 in verse 32, and Pastor's talking here in verses 28 through 31, talking about in Daniel 7. Daniel 7:7 says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and exceedingly strong, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured. Keep this word in mind, because it actually brings to light what we're looking at here. In verse 29, it broke in pieces, then trampled the residue with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns, or 10 religions. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, and that is shown in verse 20. Well, these other religions, Pastor says in verse 31 here, they're what this little horn had to deal with, and are still having to deal with today. In verse 32, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up. That's the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, plucked up by the roots and transplanted in Rome. That's where they were transplanted into. And of course, there is where they put their most power together. And it's still a powerful situation, but it's breaking down inside. It's been breaking down for years, deteriorating. And most of all, the minds are deteriorating. Mankind's minds, so they don't have ability now because of the sickness, probably from the swine. Because all their good deeds, all their evil like the gods, they're breaking down. Their minds are breaking down. Their bodies are breaking down. Their system is crumbling. And remember, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, they were all transplanted in Rome, where they put their power together. And all their power has come to what? Has come to nothing. All their power is crumbling and it's falling. And men, I encourage you to continue to remain strong in Yahweh's house. And the key to remaining strong in Yahweh's house is remaining obedient to Yahweh's teachings. And these teachings are coming forth from Yahweh's great priest. And just to conclude here, in Proverbs 4:13 it says, take a firm hold on instruction, do not let it go, guard it well, for it is your life. And it says in verse 27, do not turn to the right nor to the left, walk away from evil, walk away from the goodness of the world. Genesis 3:5, the evil like the gods. Continue, men, to remain tethered to the chosen branch, the great Khan Yisrayl Abel Hawkins. And at this time, if you will stand, Yahweh bless your great Sabbath day. I have the great privilege and honor to present to you one of Yahweh's great mighty priests, the great Kohan Malachiah Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, man. You may be seated. So we're going to continue from where the great priest left off, speaking about this BC system and the Vatican. But if you have a book of Yahweh, let us just look quickly over to Daniel. All right, Daniel chapter 7. All right, where it said, and he will speak great words against Yahweh and wear out mentally. Right, wear out mentally. As you know, this word mental means everything have to do with the mind. That is dealing mentally. Right? Just recently the Pope said, well, look, you don't have to keep those 613 laws. Right? He's coming out full blast and attacking the house of Yahweh. Right? And this is the mental attack that he's putting in our minds right now. Right? So we have to be very, very careful of this mental attack, because Daniel said it will wear us out mentally. He will wear us out mentally. Right? So we have to guard our minds, guard our thought. Right? We have to be very careful, because how the world look at the laws of Yahweh. The world look at the laws of Yahweh as restriction. Oh, you people is restricted with these laws. But how we look at the laws of Yahweh, how do we look at the laws of Yahweh is what? To us. Yes, a friend. That's right, it's protection. The laws of Yahweh is protection to us. They look at it as restriction. We have to look at the laws of Yahweh as protection to us. Right? And if we don't guard our minds carefully, we'll find our minds starting to be built up with all this mental attack that, the Catholic Church and the Pope is putting on the House of Yahweh. And if we don't guard our mind, pretty soon we'll find ourselves saying, well, I don't know what I'm doing here. Best I look to leave here. Because of that mental attack. Right? So please don't fall into that trap. Right? Don't fall into that trap. Look at the laws as a friend. Look at it as something that will protect us. Right? Because this is how Yahshua looked at the laws. He was very zealous for the house of Yahweh. But he was zealous for the laws of Yahweh. The laws of Yahweh is the mind of Yahweh. To be like Yahweh, in Genesis 1:26, it says, I'll make man in my image and after my likeness. We have to have that same mindset as Yahweh. We have to use the laws to govern our mind, to govern our body, to govern the way we think, the way we act. That is what we have to use the laws of Yahweh for. That is how we're going to become as Yahweh. All right, so continuing in where the great priest left off, we'll start at verse 38. Our pastor goes on to speak about in the days of Samuel. Right, it's 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 4. We're talking about all the elders in there came to Samuel. Yeah, 1 Samuel 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 4. It said, then all the elders of Israel. No, it's not talking about completely all the elders, because Samuel did have reliable men. Most of them, though, were not in the crowd in Jerusalem, in the Vatican. They were at Abel. So you see, all the work of Yahweh, as we know, was at Abel. All the righteous priests, the prophet of Yahweh, all of them was taught at Abel. As the scripture said, to receive an answer, where you have to go? That's right. You have to ask at Abel, and that will settle the matter. Right? They wanted to be there. It was peaceful and quiet. And of course, the people could be at peace and worship and learn, read and study with the priest. Right? But why it was so peaceful at Abel is because Psalms 119, 165 say, great peace have they who love your law. Now, you have to understand what that psalm is saying. It says, great peace is they who love your law. So to have great peace, we have to love the laws of Yahweh, to have great peace. That is first part of it. Right? And it said, and nothing will offend them. Right? Nothing will offend them. Okay. Nothing will offend you. Cause to fall away. Right? And this is why they had peace. Well, we know Yahweh protected them for a specific reason, to bring forth the book of Yahweh for us. Right? That is why Yahweh guard and protect Abel at that time. Because their work had to lead up to our work in these last days. Our work is the most important work right now. Right? That's why Yahweh protected them at that time. But within that community, it had peace. Because every individual loved the laws of Yahweh. Right? They meditate on the laws of Yahweh day and night. That's why they had peace there. Right? So, to have peace, we have to actually love the laws of Yahweh, whereby we'll reach that point where nothing whatsoever will offend us. Right? Cause us to fall or cause us to sin. Right? Over in verse 41, where Pastor goes on to show us about the different gods Israel was worshiping at that time. He mentioned Easter, in chapter 7, right? He mentioned Baal, Lord. But all these gods that Israel wanted to go back. When Moshe took them out of Egypt and they went in the wilderness, when they was going to the house of Yahweh, they keep on crying out to Moshe, best we go back to Egypt, go back to Egypt. They didn't want to go back, it's not physically go back to the exact same spot, but the type of lifestyle, they wanted to go back to. That's what they was always complaining and griping about. We want to go back to that form of lifestyle. Right, so Pastor goes on to explain to us, he said that even the pharaohs, after they die, they'll make them into a god. Just like you remember when in Exodus, when Pharaoh rose up very early. He rose up very early in the morning, and he went down to the river Nile to relieve himself. Right? And the side note show that the people believe that the gods in there don't use the bathroom. But Pharaoh, he rose up very early in the morning when no one could see him and went down to the river Nile to release himself. Right? So everyone will think, well, look, he is a god. Well, he really was a god. Right? Down to verse 42, it said, and if you will notice, they rose up against Samuel, and they said, we want a king. So basically, what Pastor is showing us here, the people and them rose up against the government Yahweh chose. Right? That is what they were crying out all the time in the wilderness for. When Moshe went up to the house of Yahweh and he left Aaron in charge and he built that calf, that is the lifestyle they wanted to go back to. That is a representation of that lifestyle they wanted to go back to. They eat and drink and rose up to play. That is what they was constantly, since the days of Moshe, they wanted to go back to. This type of lifestyle they wanted to go back to is to sin. Just like in the days of Moshe, as I mentioned. Now, when we look at, remember, they wanted to go back to sin. As Genesis 1, as the great priest had mentioned, Genesis 4, verse 7, where it said, the desire to sin is with you, but you must what? That's right. We must overcome it. And that's the key thing, that is one of the key things we have to keep in our mind. We must overcome it. Because that lifestyle that they wanted to go back to, most of the time when we hear, well, look, they wanted to go back to that type of lifestyle, the first thing will come in our mind, well, look, it's fornication, it's adultery, it's bestiality, it's sodomy, right? That's the first things, will come to our mind, that type of lifestyle. But what about holding a grudge? Right? Holding a grudge for a brother. Hating a brother in your heart. In our heart, I should say. Despising a brother. That's the same type of lifestyle they wanted to go back to. No difference. It's not only sodomy and fornication and adultery. Hatred in their heart. All that is part of that same lifestyle. Over down to verse 44. Verse 44, it said, just as they had done to me from the day I brought them out of Egypt to this very day, they are now doing to you. They are forsaking me in order to serve God. So we see from since that time to now, the ancestors of these people who is in the Vatican right now, it's the same lifestyle they is projecting for the world right now. That same lifestyle, nothing different. The only difference is right now, sin reached at its peak right now. Right? But it's the same type of God worship. day is bringing forth, the Vatican is bringing forth right now. Verse 45 said, then he said, verse 9, so listen to them, however, solemnly be warned them, and let them know, the king who will reign over them will behave towards them. And I see the reason why they wanted a king, they didn't want a priest, because they know fully they could control, that king. Right? They know they could control that king because, for instance, an example is with Saul and Samuel. Right? Samuel gave him specific instruction what to do. And when he came back and he was disobedient, the first thing he said, well, the people and the people and them influenced me, to do such and such. But look at that scenario. That scenario could have a lot of counseling before. Right? Samuel could have been counseling Saul a lot before he totally turned in rebellion. Right? So because we have to picture it just like what is taken right now in the house of Yahweh. Right? The amount of counseling, the priest will counsel an individual over and over and over and over. And the person will just totally rebel. We have to look at it in that way. Samuel could have been counseling Saul a lot. Right? And after one point in time, Saul just decided, well, look, I don't even care what Samuel have to say. I don't have to care what the priest have to say. I'll just do what I want to do. Right? And that was the consequences for his action. Right? He was totally cut off from Yahweh. Totally cut off. Right? Because he willfully rebelled against Yahweh. He willfully rebelled against the voice of Yahweh. So, we have to look at it. We have to look at it just as the administration of Yahweh is set up right now. When you're reading the scripture, that is the way we have to understand the scripture. It's not just boom and something just occur. Just like that, overnight, boom. Right? So he could have been getting, serious counseling. Down to verse 49. For it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than after they have known it to have turned from the holy laws to deliver to them. Now, this is still speaking about, the Vatican. The 12 tribes who separate themselves from Yahweh. These are the ones that still is in power right now, right? As we see in the Roman Empire today. Verse 50. They have befallen them the things spoken of a true proverb. A dog returned to his own vomit, and a sow is washed only to water again in the mouth. Down to Matthew chapter 11, verse 12. And from the time of Yachanan the Mercer until now, the kingdom of Yahweh have been advancing forcefully, and forceful men lay hold of it. Right? And this is still speaking about the Vatican. The Vatican is still in control of that. And Pastor went up towards the scepter of righteousness. Right? That scepter of righteousness had to return to the house of Yahweh. Have to return, to Yahshua. Down to verse 53. It said, look at chapter 21, because Yahweh, after he was finished with Jerusalem and the Savior, for the time being, he was about to fulfill a prophecy here. In fact, there were several prophecies that prophesied that would take place. But in Matthew 21:43, he said, therefore I say to you, now, he's talking about them not keeping the laws of Yahweh, rejecting the one sent. That is verse 36. And of course, he said, because of this, verse 43, Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of Yahweh will be taken from you, or from them, taken from you. No, they were still holding onto the kingdom. They were still preaching the laws of Yahweh at the set time in the temple. But then all of that was taken from them because they would not repent. So we see exactly what is taking place. They did not want to keep that laws of Yahweh. They didn't want to repent and turn from Yahweh whatsoever. But he said the kingdom will be taken from them. The kingdom of Yahweh is going to be taken from them. And who the kingdom of Yahweh will be given to? That's right. The kingdom will be given to us. That's why Pastor is bringing us to that point. Right, as the great priest had mentioned, right now we're in the purple stage. Right, even if we don't understand the significance of it, as he had mentioned, obedience comes first, and then the understanding will come. Right, but all those different stages, Pastor is showing us bit by bit what position that we're going to be offered in the kingdom of Yahweh. He said the very highest position in the kingdom of Yahweh. Right, and he goes on to say, will be taken from you and given to a people of the same habit, but from a foreign land, and they will bring forth the fruit of it. What is the fruit of the kingdom? You say, and they will bring forth the fruit of it. That's going to be right here in America at this time, fulfilled, started by the two witnesses in the last days. Well, we, the house of Yahweh, are the ones that is bringing forth the fruit, the teaching of Abraham. Right? We are the only ones that will teach them and to show them the benefit of keeping the laws of Yahweh. Right? We will be bringing forth and teaching them the way to salvation. We are the one responsible for that. Remember, Pastor said we will be even teaching some of the prophets and apostles. Because in these last days, we have that great understanding of the plan of Yahweh. We have that understanding. Right? So don't look at, as that as something very simple. Don't look at that as something very simple. We are very blessed to be called out by Yahweh to his house, and Yahweh opened our minds and showing us the great plan of Yahweh. Right? We should be very, very, very joyful for that. And, we should try our utmost best to hold fast to this kingdom. Because, as Pastor mentioned, there is only two kingdoms in this world. The kingdom of Yahweh and the kingdom of the gods. So anytime we step away from the kingdom of Yahweh, we're going right back to God worship. Only two choices. We don't have a third and a fourth and a fifth. Only two choices we have. Right? And this is what Yahshua Benan said. He said, for me and my house, he said, choose who you will serve today. But for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. And it's only one place we could serve Yahweh. It's only in the house of Yahweh we could serve Yahweh. No other place we could go and serve Yahweh. Because only the house of Yahweh is keeping those laws. Right? Those same laws that the Pope said, well, we don't have to keep. They don't have to keep it, but we in the house of Yahweh have to keep the laws of Yahweh. Right? That's how we are trained to become like Yahweh. So, it said that these people always wanted to go back. They always want to go back to that same lifestyle. Right? And when we look at, if we read the book of Judges, how many times in the book of Judges we saw, again, the children of Israel did evil in the eyes of Yahweh. Right? Or the children of Israel did not remember Yahweh their Father. Right? That is a great scenario to show how much they wanted to go back to that type of lifestyle over and over and over. Right? In Judges chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 6, chapter 8, chapter 10, chapter 13, we find those scenarios. Right? They always want to go back to that type of lifestyle. Right? So that is what the Catholic Church is bringing forward right now. Right? That same type of God worship. Right? That same type of illicit type of lifestyle. But we in the House of Yahweh, we have to bring forth what the laws of Yahweh is bringing forth right now. We have to bring forth that peaceful solution. You know the peaceful solution, if we don't understand how the peaceful solution really works, right? As Pastor said, we have to apply it in our lives to actually make it work. Right? The laws will show us, okay, for example, the laws will say, simple one, do not steal. The peaceful solution will break it down and show us exactly, why not to steal. What mindset a person will have when you steal from them. What type of mindset you should have if someone steals from you. Right? It guides us step by step by step. Once we apply it in our minds, then we'll become that perfect man. That is why the peaceful solution is so important. Right? It shows that we must have self-control. Everything we do, we must have self-control. Remember, self-control is what? The foundation. That's right. The self-control is the foundation of all positive interaction. So if we don't have self-control, we wouldn't be responsible. We wouldn't be respectful. We wouldn't be reliable. Right? And all the laws of Yahweh, right? All these 21 traits apply to the laws of Yahweh. That is how we become perfect in the laws of Yahweh. Must apply it. Right? That is what the peaceful solution is. We must apply those traits in our lives. Anytime we're having a problem, we're working together and we're having a problem, it's either one or two people is not keeping that peaceful solution. Because if one keep it and one don't keep it, the one not keeping it, he will automatically shut down the whole scenario. Whatever conflict, he will automatically shut it down. Right? That is what the peaceful solution does. Now, if the two people not keeping it, what we're going to have? War, retaliation, constant conflict. Right? That is what we're going to have. So once we apply it in our lives, we will see it automatically works. Right? We will find, well, look, things, that peace, what we mentioned earlier on, where the people live in Abel was having, they apply all these traits. That is why they had that peace. Right? So for an individual to have peace in our life, for we to have peace in our lives, we must apply all these traits. Right? Whatever problem, whatever thing that we do need to overcome, the peaceful solution is there to help us overcome it. Once we apply it, that is going to help us overcome it. Right? There is nothing, no sin that the peaceful solution will not help us overcome. No sin whatsoever. None. And that is how we will enter the kingdom. That is how we're going to make it as kings and priests. That is how we're going to qualify for that color purple. Let's go over to page 64. Let's look at verse 63. It says, Shaul, that is the apostle Shaul, was a tent maker. If you know what that means, he had a lot of women who were making talit and kippah, holy garments. They made him a gold vest. I'm joking. Further on, he said he was a priest, and before he died, he may, but I don't really think so. I think the goal is for us, and Yahweh showed that it's the highest position we will ever. It's the highest position we'll even could even imagine. Well, if you could even imagine achieving, and it's offered to this last generation, the hardest generation to pull out of sin. Right? Pastor said we are the hardest generation to pull out of sin, and you have got it, and you can do it. Right? The pastor is showing us, yes, no matter what sin, that we were engulfed in, we can overcome those sins. That's what Genesis said. Sin is crouching at our door, but we must overcome it. If we could not overcome sin, Yahweh would have never told us we could have overcome sin. Right? He would have never said we could overcome sin. So don't think whatever, Yahweh is so merciful and forgiving. Whatever sin a person had done in their life, want to turn and repent and turn to Yahweh, Yahweh is going to forgive that individual. Right? When we look at the Apostle Shaul, right? Look at the things that the Apostle Shaul did. He actually hunted down the House of Yahweh members, dragged them from wherever they were, carried them to the chief priest in the temple, the Vatican. And they were put in lions' den and all this. Right? And he even testified of himself. He said he done all these things. And what occurred? Yahweh still had mercy upon Shaul. And Shaul was a murderer. Right? And if Yahweh could have all that mercy and still open Shaul's mind, and Shaul was an excellent, he understood the laws of Yahweh. He really understood the laws of Yahweh. When you read Shaul's books, we could actually see how wise and understanding he was in the laws of Yahweh and understanding the kingdom of Yahweh. And Yahweh opened his mind and he qualified for the kingdom of Yahweh. So what about us? That is to show the mercy that Yahweh have. Don't think, well, look, I am so sinful, Yahweh is never going to forgive me. Yes, Yahweh is going to forgive. That is what Yahweh is there for. Yahweh said he is going to forgive us. Right? And Yahweh look at us, is looking at us as very special. Because remember, we are the choices. The pastor said we are the rottenness, the worst of the bunch. Okay. We are the worst of the bunch. And still Yahweh is offering us the highest position. Now when I say the highest position, when I say the highest position, I'm speaking under Yeshua, under pastor. He's offering us the highest position. And pastor says we are the worst of the bunch. Right? The worst of the bunch. But Yahweh is so merciful. Yahweh is so merciful to us. Right? Once we steadfast, stay in the house of Yahweh, whatever we need to overcome, constantly try to overcome it. Apply the peaceful solution to overcome whatever sin that we have, that we are struggling with. Apply it and it will work. Right? And every individual will make it in the kingdom of Yahweh. Because this is what Pastor said. Pastor said his desire for everyone to make it in the kingdom of Yahweh. Right? And we should actually work towards that. So men, let's go ahead and close.